All right, guys, welcome back to our study in the book of Daniel. Now, the last time we were here, we completed chapter 2, and we were looking at the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. And it was an unusual situation that Nebuchadnezzar went to his wise men and counselors and asked them first to tell him what he dreamed and then give the interpretation of the dream. Now, this, as I said, was very strange to do because who in the world would know what a man had dreamed? But nevertheless, in the irrationality of Nebuchadnezzar, he demanded that they should tell him the dream, give them the interpretation, or be subject to death. He would kill them and turn their property into a rubbish heap. Now, what is important to understand Nebuchadnezzar's position was that he wanted to really believe, he wanted to have faith in their interpretation. That is, if these so-called wise men were able to give the dream, then Nebuchadnezzar would be assured that whatever interpretation that they gave, they truly gave the interpretation. But nevertheless, the wise men could not do so, and therefore Nebuchadnezzar demanded or commanded that all of his wise men should be destroyed. Now, for some reason, Daniel was not present at this occasion, and therefore, when the Arioch, the executioner of the king, went out to destroy all of the wise men, of course, Daniel was considered one of them. We understood all of this, Daniel as well as his three friends, from chapter 1. And so Daniel, being unaware of the situation, asks, what is going on? Why is the command from the king so harsh? And thus Daniel was told about the king's request, the dream as well as the interpretation. And so Daniel went before the king and requested some time. And after requesting some time, he went to his three friends and asked them to join him in prayer that the God of Israel would reveal to Daniel whatever the king's dream was, as well as supply the interpretation, so that Daniel and his three friends would not be killed along with the rest of the wise men. So after a time, God gave Daniel the revelation, and Daniel spoke to Arioch, the commander, and told him, tell the king I have the answer. And so he went before the king and sent Daniel before the king, and Daniel revealed to the king what we understand to be, in theological terms, the times of the Gentiles. That is, the time when the Gentiles would rule or have influence over the nation of Israel as well as the Jewish people. And so he spoke to the king and told him about the great statue that he saw, with the head of gold representing himself, the arms of silver representing Medes and the Persians, and then the bronze, the abdominal section of bronze representing Greece, and then finally the legs of iron representing Rome, and then the 10 toes of iron and clay representing the final 10 world kingdoms. And in giving this revelation to King Nebuchadnezzar, he was so astounded that he actually paid homage, as if to worship Daniel, and the idea of worshiping Daniel's God through Daniel. But nevertheless, he did this, and then he commanded that Daniel should be blessed. And we saw also Daniel really being exalted in all of the province of Babylon. And so also, too, we remember that Daniel's three friends, by the desire of Daniel, were also promoted in the provinces of Babylon. So Daniel became the chief ruler in the province of Babylon. Remember, the province of Babylon was just only one of the provinces of Nebuchadnezzar's great empire, but nevertheless, it was the chief province. So therefore, when Daniel was promoted, he was promoted to one of the best positions and the highest positions, and his three friends were rulers under him. All right. Now, with that in mind, we go into chapter 3. And as we move into chapter 3, what we can see is a sense of a carry-on. That is, what did Nebuchadnezzar truly think or believe about Daniel's interpretation? And we find out he honestly believed that interpretation. And remember, In Daniel's interpretation of those world empires, his empire was considered to be the best. It was the head of gold. Remember, it went from gold, silver, bronze, and to iron. All right. And so with this in mind, he himself being the head of gold, we can see that Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 3 constructed an image. No doubt the image was probably, and we're just simply, we don't know for sure. It just simply said an image. But the image was most likely the image of a man portraying himself. All right, let's get into chapter 3. Again, although chapter 3 is somewhat lengthy, it is still narrative told in like a story form. As a matter of fact, it's one of the stories that most of us can remember as children that we heard. All right, the 3 Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace. But let's begin. We should be able to complete all of chapter 3 in this study. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So here again, as we were saying, we can see what was the end result in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar with respect to Daniel's interpretation of the dream. He created a statue. And as I said earlier, the assumption would be the statue of a man. Why? Since the statue that Nebuchadnezzar actually saw in the dream was one of a man, and he himself was the head of that man. But he was what? The head of gold. And so we see here that this image is an image of gold. Now, most likely this was not pure gold, but this was an image overladen with gold. And the statue of this image was huge, approximately 90 feet tall with a base of about 9 to 10 feet. So clearly this has the image, if it were to be a great image, one of a man. But nevertheless, it was a huge, great, golden, shiny image. And he set this up in the plains of Dura, basically in an open plain. And the idea, no doubt, would be where a number of people could gather. And in the mindset of Nebuchadnezzar, the people don't know it at this time, but in the mindset that they may worship the image, which would be an image of himself, an image of his own political and religious power. But that's premature. Let's get into the text first. Then Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps. Remember, these guys were over the provinces, right? The prefects, like the military commanders, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So notice there is no instance stated as to why they were gathering except for at the command of the king. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, the treasurers, don't you like I keep saying the same ones? The judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So they all gathered together, for what purpose the king had actually brought them there, which was in their mindset, a dedication of the image. However, there would be somewhat of a surprise given at this dedication. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language." Now, I like that too. As we get into this particular part, remember that Nebuchadnezzar, the idea, especially stemming from Daniel chapter 2, what was the interpretive word of Daniel? That God had given Nebuchadnezzar authority over all the peoples of the earth. So the idea in a spiritual sense, if you let me say it that way, is what? All the peoples of the world. Now, even, and I'm not going to comment on it right now, but as we talk about it later on at the end of this video, the spiritual indications for the latter days as to what this actually means, this is important to understand. What? That all the peoples of the world are commanded to worship this image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. That's the idea. That's the mindset you need to have. And that's the mindset that we will be given at the end of this discussion. But anyway, nations of men in every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon. Trigon was like a triangular shaped harp, so to speak. The psaltery, harp, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. So notice the command was given. And when you hear all of the music, and notice how this form of worship was actually accompanied with all kinds of music. And you can imagine the music was really nice, because music helps to emotionally engage people in worship. But the point is, fall down and worship the golden image. And that becomes a problem. Not a problem for the Gentiles, but a specific problem for certain men who were present. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, notice that, all the peoples, again, this would be significant as we look to the end times, what all peoples of the world will be doing in the worship of another man who sets up an image concerning himself. But not at this time. I won't talk about it. Nations and men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. All right. So everybody worshiped the image. However, there was an exception, a notable exception. For this reason, verse number 8. At that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. And that's interesting when it says brought charges. It means like to tear to pieces, to eat at is actually the language that is used, which meant that it shows the mindset of these men who were accusing these three Hebrew men that we're going to talk about right here, right? Their mindset is to destroy them. And the reason, the motivating reason, jealousy. They brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever, which is always a blessing to give the king, that his throne may continue. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. Now notice, that is the command. Now watch it carefully. Watch this carefully. You made the command. When you hear the music, fall down and worship the image. Verse 11. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. All these things are true. They're just simply restating the king's command. Hear the accusation. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon. Now you can see the jealousy begin to eke out. Remember what I told you about the province of Babylon. It's the chief. It is the best. And these men are the rulers. And what is moving these men, these Chaldeans, to make the accusation against the three friends of Daniel is jealousy. And then also, too, the absence of Daniel. Now, we don't know where Daniel is. We don't know why Daniel is mentioned. And anything else would basically be a conjecture to why Daniel is not present. All we know is in the summing of the king, bringing all of the rulers and all of the magistrates and all of the great people in his kingdom, the idea. And by bringing them in, it means that those people under them are also subject. You got it? So the idea, worldwide worship. But nevertheless, we don't know where Daniel is, but all we know is he's absent from these events, and only his three brothers, that is Hebrew kinsmen, are present. But he continues. You've appointed the administration over a province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, now here is where you got to watch it. These men, O king, have disregarded you. Now, right there, they're trying to make the king angry. Why you got to say they disregard? Why just say they have not obeyed you? No, they didn't say they simply didn't obey you. They disregard you. What? Notice, they do not serve your gods. Now, this seems to suggest that these men have been previously watching Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That even though they were had been brought into Babylon, given the Babylonian name, and submerged into the Babylonian culture and Babylonian gods, Babylonian wisdom and teaching, nevertheless, they maintain their own separate religion, the worship of their own gods, and they reject. So the point, you see the point that I'm trying to say, these men have been watching them not only at the time when they bowed before the statue, but previously, so that they understood these three Hebrew men did not worship the gods of the Babylonians or the gods of Nebuchadnezzar. They do not serve your gods or worship. Now, here's the point, present point. Or worship the golden image which you have set up. So now they're coming. So they haven't been serving your gods in the past, and neither are they worshiping this image right now. And again, watch Nebuchadnezzar. And we talked about this earlier, how Nebuchadnezzar had a trigger anger problem. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. So he was enraged at the idea that they would disobey him, the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods?" You see where the offense is? Serving my gods, or even what? Worship the golden image that I have set up. And so in bringing them before the king, he said, "Is it true what I hear about you guys?" But remember that these men were favored by the king. We see that in chapter 1. And because of this previous favor that they had by the king, you can see him giving them a second chance. Answer the charge against you. 15. Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a burning, blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? So here we now have somewhat of a challenge to the God of Israel. And this is the issue, because what? Nebuchadnezzar is not only seeing him as the political ruler of all, he sees himself as the religious ruler of all. In other words, notice he said, what God can deliver you out of my hand. So therefore, Nebuchadnezzar is portraying and presenting himself to be a god. He is greater than all the gods. And because he is greater than all the gods, then he's saying to them, what God of yours can deliver out of my hands? Who is greater than Nebuchadnezzar? So now the challenge, then this is basically what we see here, a challenge that Nebuchadnezzar not simply presents to these three men, but to the God of these three men. 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. Now that's the first thing. What? You ask what God will save you. The first part of their response has to do with the ability of their God. Their God can do all things. Their God can even deliver them from Nebuchadnezzar. The Nebuchadnezzar who went into Jerusalem and Judah and sacked it. The Nebuchadnezzar that made Judah and his king a vassal. The Nebuchadnezzar who would destroy Jerusalem and its temple. And even though Nebuchadnezzar had all of this success in the land of the God of the Jews, he himself still was not more powerful than the God of the Jews. All that he had done, all that he had accomplished was by the hand of the God of the Jews. That's Daniel chapter 2. He's able to deliver us from the fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. And that is a statement of faith. They believe that because of their faithfulness and their fidelity to God, even his commandments, even remember as early as chapter 1, we will not defile ourselves with the king's food. In their faithfulness to God, God would respond and deliver them. That was their faith. But verse number 18 is actually, in my opinion, the most important part of their words. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. You see, everybody always wants Superman. No matter what, he wins in the end. In the end, somehow the good guy always wins. So this is basically what we love to talk about. This is what preachers love to preach. And the point is the no suffering, the prosperity, that everything will always end well. But that's not always the case. Look at, my God, I'm about to preach. Look at Hebrews chapter 11 when it talks about what people say, the heroes of the faith. Notice it has two actual parts of that chapter. The first part of that chapter deals with those whom God delivers. But notice what the writer of Hebrews does not do. He does not say everything always ends well. He talks about others who were sown asunder, cast into the fire, those who suffered death and who did not receive such resurrection at that time, that is life or deliverance at that time. But the point that I'm trying to make, we have to put in our minds, be willing to suffer, even if that suffering is unto death. And what are the Hebrew boys facing? They are facing an awful, painful death. And they're saying, our God will deliver. However, even if he doesn't deliver, even if things don't work out, as we like to say, all right, even if I don't come out on top, no matter what, I will never, ever change my mind. I will never serve your gods. I will never turn my back on the God that I serve. And this is the point of it all. What if God does not deliver? Because we find out in our scriptures, sometimes God delivers, and sometimes delivery of God is unto suffering and unto death. Remember, okay, let me leave it alone. Boy, I want to preach that. Sometimes it doesn't always end out like you want it to be. Sometimes the saints of God get sick. Sometimes the saints of God get that horrific phone call in the middle of a night talking about something has happened to their child. Sometimes it goes bad. What will you do, and what is your response? And my response, and I hope to say your response, even if it doesn't work out well, even if God doesn't deliver in this thing, I will stand by my God. He is our God forever and ever. To him be the praise and glory and majesty forever and ever. We are his creatures, and whatever he says, amen. Why? Because we know that in the very end, when it all works out, all things will work out for our good. I don't care what it may look like. I don't care what it feels like. I don't care what it seems like. In the end, God works all things together for the good of those who are his elect ones. But anyway, back to the text. Sorry about that preaching. 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath. And remember, we already talked about his irrationality. And now these three Hebrew men are trying to defy Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold. And so now he is angry beyond words. And his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember, at first he liked them. They were all right with him. But now he will not permit anyone to defy his person. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. A couple of things. He is angry. He is in a rage. He says, heat that furnace as hot as you can get it, 7 times hotter. But another point, usually heated. That means that he has used this furnace before. This joker. This is not the first time he's heated that furnace to execute somebody. He's using it again, but now because of his rage, you see, if he by 7 times hotter, he wants to burn them and kill them instantly, so that he may use these boys as an example. Whatever you do not defy Nebuchadnezzar nor his gods. You see what I'm trying to say now? You don't so he's making an example out of them, that they don't die slowly in a hot furnace, but at an extremely heated furnace immediately. 20. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his armor to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their clothes, and were cast in the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Now, what's unique about this? First of all, he got the valiant men. He made certain that they would not escape by getting these big, strong guys to bind them up and tie them. However, it was unusual for these men to be cast in their garments, that is, in their political garb. You can imagine by these men being what? Big time government officials and whatnot, the appearance that they had at the time with the clothing and the hats and things of that nature. So these things would normally be removed. But because Nebuchadnezzar was in a rage, he just simply said, tie these jokers up at once and cast them in, just like they are. For this reason, because the king's command, verse 22, was urgent, and the furnace had been extremely hot, the flame of fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so, because they didn't give the fire a chance to simmer down, the fire was still blazing. So as these 3 mighty men had bound Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to cast them in the fire, they got killed by the flames themselves. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm. And the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods. So after having them cast in, Nebuchadnezzar, no doubt standing from an observable distance, so he himself would not be affected by the fire, he saw all of a sudden, as the men were thrown into the flame, that something miraculous had taken place, and he was there looking and observing. So he turned to his officials and said, "I thought we only threw 3 in." And they replied, "That's correct, King. It was only 3 men." He said, "Look then, I see 4 men standing." And notice what they were doing. They were walking. So the ropes that they were bound, it's amazing how God did that. He burned the ropes off them to free them, when at the same time, as we'll find out later on, as the ropes were burned, their skin was not burned, and neither was their royal garb, their clothing. It was not burned either. And so the king was astounded as he saw an accompanying person that was in the fire. And the king said, he was like this one, the appearance of the fourth was like one of the sons of the gods. So we don't know whatever it was. It was like the appearance of a man. That's the idea. However, the appearance of this fourth individual was something special. Let me just simply say it this way. Something special that got the attention of Nebuchadnezzar. Whatever it was that, I don't want to say glowing. I don't know what to say. But it's this fourth man stood out in such a way that Nebuchadnezzar immediately recognized him as not simply being a human, something of a divine nature, something related to the gods. Now, in the King James Version, it is written the Son of God. Actually, in the text, it is a son of the gods. You see, Nebuchadnezzar was not a worshiper, or he didn't really have the knowledge of the true God. He didn't have that particular knowledge. He was basically a pagan polytheist. He worshiped many gods, but he did believe in some type of a divine interruption into this world. In other words, that God could intervene in this world in what he was looking at in the furnace of fire. So he didn't call him like the Son of God, Jesus. All right, that's the idea, or the Christ. It could have been Jesus. It could have been what we call a pre-incarnate appearance. Pre means before, incarnate becoming flesh. A pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus before him being born into this world through Mary, right? It could have been Jesus manifesting himself in a fleshly way. It could have been, or it could have been simply one of the angels of God, all right? But the point is, Nebuchadnezzar understood such a being as one of the sons of the gods. 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. Now he's able to kind of come a little bit, the fire coming down a little bit, no doubt. And who knows just how long, I like that too, how long these guys were in the fire before the blade. Remember, the flame killed the soldiers that bound Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The flame was just that awful that it killed them. So no doubt it took some time for the flame to die down for Nebuchadnezzar to approach the furnace, right? What? So he approached that fire, and he responded and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here." Notice how now he speaks concerning them, or that is their God. Servants of the Most High God. Remember the challenge? Who is that God that can deliver you from my hand? Or should I say, me, the great Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar himself. I am the God of gods. But notice there is a God that is higher than any other God. And we see that in Daniel also too a few times, the most high God. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of fire. The satraps, the prefects, governors, and kings' high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect. Notice, it didn't have any effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed. The easiest thing to burn would be the hair, nor were their trousers damaged. The clothing was not burned, and here, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. They seemed as if they were not in the fire at all. This was amazing as these governing officials gathered around to inspect these men. They wanted to look closely and say, my God, what the world? They were not destroyed or even harmed by the fire. Nebuchadnezzar responded, verse 28, and said, blessed. That guy is something else. He goes from one extreme to the next, from extreme rage to now extreme appreciation and blessing of the God of Daniel. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angels, Malach is the Hebrew word here, his angel or messenger, and delivered his servants who put their trust in him. And right there, we have a theme for this particular chapter. What did he say? Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who did what? Sent his angels and delivered his servants who put their trust in him. And in that theme, there is a practical message that God is intentionally trying to give. God is able and God will deliver those who put their trust in him. Now, it doesn't mean the deliverance always takes the faction, the appearance that we want. But nevertheless, God will deliver his people. Oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, let me take a quick aside. We see the same thing said concerning King Josiah. He died at the age of 31 in the battle with Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. And the thing was, Josiah was a godly king, to the point that the Bible said that there was no king like King Josiah. Normally, what do we see? We see long life for kings who are godly kings. But why was Josiah killed at such a young age? Why did God permit him to die? It was a point of deliverance that God has set for King Josiah. Why? Destruction was determined for Judah. God would not turn his hand from destroying Judah. In God's sympathy or having empathy towards Josiah, he literally took him out so that he would not live to see all of the evils. And when I say evils, I'm talking about the destruction that God would bring on Jerusalem. So therefore, we see what? God allowing Josiah to be killed was a form of mercy towards Josiah. What it is deliverance. God will deliver one way or another. Okay, going back to the text. Delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. And that closes the theme. What is the theme? God delivers his servants who put their trust in him. Why? So that they will not and do not worship or serve any God but their own. And therefore, the practical point of this is, no matter what the occasion, no matter what the persecution, no matter what the temptation, no matter what the threat is, we serve our God and we serve him alone. And because of this, again, we can see Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was extremely generous. Let me say that too. He was a pagan king, but nevertheless, when he saw the power and witnessed the power of God, he was extremely generous and open and truthful in his response to God's working. 29. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap. Inasmuch, why did he make such a decree? In other words, let no one in all of the provinces of Nebuchadnezzar speak anything evil against Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, the God of Daniel and his friends. No one speak against this God. Why? There is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. You see, Nebuchadnezzar had gods, yes, and they had all kinds of, in their pantheon of idol gods, but in all of his life, he had never seen such a demonstration of power, and it was a power of deliverance. Then the king called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. Again, you can see what that generosity of Nebuchadnezzar. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me with that. Let's just take a simple review. Nebuchadnezzar, moved by the interpretation of Daniel concerning his dream in chapter 2, with Nebuchadnezzar being the head of gold over this great statue of a man. What does he do? He lifted up in arrogance and pride, and that's going to count against Nebuchadnezzar, as we're going to see even later on in chapter 4, being lifted up in pride, how God is able to humble you. But nevertheless, he creates this golden statue, no doubt one of a man similar to himself, and he commands all of his rulers and officials to gather in the plains of Dura there. And there he has all kinds of music to be played, and he gives the command, when you hear the music, fall down and worship the image. And failure to do so will mean you will be killed and your houses reduced to rubbish. So at the time of the music, all the peoples that Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled over, the idea of worldwide rule, all of those people at that sound bowed down to worship, with the exception of 3 men. And moved by jealousy, certain of the Chaldeans came to the king, trying to rip these men apart, and told the king, and they said it in such a way to incite him to anger: these men don't regard you, they don't worship your gods, and neither did they obey your command to worship the image. And so Nebuchadnezzar angered at these 3 men, but remember, he favored them earlier, but he brought them in to give them a second chance. He said, all right, what is this that I hear about you, that you don't worship my gods and you don't bow before the image? Second chance, boys. When you hear the music, drop down and bow. Everything will go well. If you do not, you will be cast into the fire. And my question, since you don't worship my God, what God can save you from my hand? And now the 3 Hebrew boys responded in faith to Nebuchadnezzar, to simply to say that, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't have to be uncertain to answer you. We will not bow down and worship your image, because our God is able to save us and will save us. However, we don't know for certain. Peradventure, if he does not save us, we still want you to know one thing, King. We will not worship your gods. We won't bow down to that image that you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar didn't like that back talk, and he was absolutely enraged and commanded his great soldiers, you bind them and heat that fire 7 times hotter than usual and cast them in. And when they tried to cast them in, they got caught up in the flames and died themselves. However, as the kings were watching approaching them for them to be killed instantly, all of a sudden he saw another man. He saw 4 men in the fire, and he turned to his officials and said, did we not put in 4? And they said, yes. And he said, one is truly a divine person, that is one of the sons of the gods. Commanding them out of the fire, he began to look at them and inspect them, as well as the other magistrates, to see that their clothing, that their hair, nothing was burned. They didn't even have the smell of smoke upon them. And Nebuchadnezzar responded with great awe to the God of Israel. And he blessed the God of Israel, who was able to deliver them out of his hand, and commanded that no ill word be spoken concerning the Hebrew God, because what? No God can deliver like this. And in the end, once again, he blessed and promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, a final word. The practical nature of this, you should already understand. Being faithful to God and how God responds in being faithful to you. But still, I want you guys to remember what I said about Josiah the king. God's deliverance does not always come in the way or the manner that you expect. But all of this speaks of Daniel chapter 3, of a coming world ruler, that is the Antichrist. And I'm speaking from Revelation 13. And he will set up an image, no doubt an image of himself, that image to which he would give life to, and he would command through his own prophet that what? All the peoples of the world to bow down and worship the image. To worship the image is to worship the Antichrist. And it will be during this time that will be great persecution upon God's people, and God's people, under the threat of death, will be commanded to either worship the Antichrist or suffer a bad death. And now what Daniel chapter 3 does, it gives encouragement, not only for those in that time in the latter day, but even throughout the period of the church history, right? That we should hold and be faithful to our God, no matter what the point of persecution might be. But especially during this time, that is Revelation chapter 13, when the Antichrist comes to rule the world. That's why we were talking about in Daniel chapter 3, all the peoples, all the nations were gathered together. That's that idea. That's that symbolism of Daniel chapter 3 as it reflects to Revelation 13 and the Antichrist, the one who will seek to make all of the world succumb to his rule as well as his worship, to worship him. And remember, to worship the Antichrist is simply to worship Satan. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me with that extensive teaching. Join me next time as we continue on, as I've already hinted, in chapter 4, as we deal with how God is able to humble those who have lifted themselves in pride. All right, guys. God bless you. See you next time.